If, right in the middle of your brother's lavish wedding, surrounded by hundreds of well-dressed guests, your own mother grabbed the mic and called you a clearance item with no tag, what would you do? Bite your tongue? Walk away? Or sit there as your 9-year-old son stood up, walked to the stage, and did what no one else dared to? I lived that moment. And what happened next brought the entire ballroom to a stunned silence. Do you think I handled it right or wrong? What would you do if your own family publicly humiliated you? Drop a comment if you've ever experienced something similar, or tell me who you think was the bravest person in this story. And don't look away, because what comes next is something you'll never forget. My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 34, a single mom, and I work at a small daycare center in Boston. My life isn't glamorous. No luxury vacations, no fancy car. But I have my son, Lucas. He's 9, smart, sensitive, and the reason I've kept going all these years. I'm not the type who craves attention. I learned to stay quiet, work hard, and hold everything together, as long as my child had a roof over his head and a reason to smile. But I never imagined that he, on one fateful evening at my brother's wedding, would be the one to stand up for me and silence an entire family with the truth. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand me better than anyone else. The laughter hit before the words fully registered. That horrible, collective sound that tells you instantly, you're the punchline. She's like a clearance item with no tag left, my mother said into the microphone, champagne flute teetering between her manicured fingers as she gestured toward me. The wedding reception hall erupted, voices bouncing off crystal chandeliers, while I sat frozen at the family table, wearing the navy blue dress I'd found on the discount rack at Macy's last week. I'm Rachel Moore, 34, single mother, and apparently tonight's entertainment at my younger brother Ethan's wedding to Vanessa Clark. My hand instinctively moved to smooth my dress, the one I'd spent 3 hours convincing myself looked elegant enough for Boston's St. Regent Hotel ballroom. The seam along the hip stretched uncomfortably when I sat. I'd known it when I bought it, but it was the only one I could afford on short notice that wasn't completely wrong for a wedding. The heat crept up my neck as I felt eyes scanning me from every table. I forced my lips into what I hoped resembled a smile, though I could feel it trembling at the edges. I wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Not in front of... Why are they laughing at you, Mom? Lucas, my 9-year-old son, looked up at me with confusion clouding his hazel eyes. My sweet boy in his second-hand suit that I'd hemmed by hand the night before. He'd insisted on a bow tie because he thought it made him look like a real gentleman. His small hand rested on mine, thumb brushing over my knuckles as he waited for an explanation I couldn't give. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out except a weak exhale. The microphone squealed with feedback as my mother passed it to Vanessa, whose perfect smile never reached her eyes when she looked in my direction. And Rachel, Vanessa's voice dripped with artificial sweetness. You know how we always joke that some people just never quite figure life out? Well, we're all just so glad you could make it tonight. It must be so hard to find a sitter on a Saturday. More laughter. Even Ethan offered a polite chuckle, though his eyes darted uncomfortably between his new wife and me. I felt the chair beside me move. Before I could react, Lucas had stood up. Lucas? I whispered urgently, reaching for his sleeve. But my son was already walking purposefully toward the stage, his small shoulders squared beneath his jacket, moving between tables of strangers with a determination that made my heart stop. That morning, standing before the mirror in our apartment, I'd watched Lucas watch me. The dress had looked better in the store. At home, under the unforgiving bathroom light, I could see every place it strained, every place it sagged. My hair, which I'd attempted to curl, had already started to fall flat on one side. You look like a movie star, Mommy, Lucas had said, sitting cross-legged on my bed, his bow tie still undone around his collar. I'd turned to him, surprised to find my vision suddenly blurry. "A movie star, huh? Which one?" He'd squinted thoughtfully. "The one from that movie we watched. The one who saves everyone at the end." I'd laughed then, a real laugh, and crouched to help with his bow tie. "Those are called heroes, buddy." "Yeah." He'd nodded seriously. "That's what I meant." Once, Ethan had looked at me like that too, like I hung the moon and stars. Back when our father walked out, leaving nothing but an empty closet and bills on the kitchen table, I'd become my little brother's protector. I was 13. He was 8. I checked his room for monsters, made his lunches, and sat beside his bed when nightmares jolted him awake. "Rach," he'd whisper in the dark, "tell me the story about the brave knight again." And I would, changing my voice for each character until his breathing became deep and regular, his small hand still clutching mine. Even through high school, we remained close. I helped him with homework, cheered at his soccer games, intimidated the kids who thought about bullying him. When I got pregnant with Lucas during my second year of community college, Ethan was the only one who didn't look at me with disappointment or pity. "You're going to be the best mom ever," he told me, hand on my still flat stomach. "This kid hit the jackpot." Everything changed when he met Vanessa 3 years ago. She came from money, real money, the kind that meant summer houses and family foundations. She had degrees from schools I couldn't afford to apply to and a laugh that sounded like it had been professionally trained. Next to her, I felt rough-edged and unfinished. My mother fell in love with Vanessa instantly. "Finally," her expressions seemed to say whenever they were together, "a daughter I can be proud of." The invitations to family dinners became less frequent. When I did attend, the conversations circled subjects I couldn't contribute to: European vacations, country club memberships, investment portfolios. Vanessa would occasionally turn to me with a manufactured smile. "And how's work, Rachel? Still at that little daycare center?" I'd nod, not mentioning the promotion to assistant director I'd received, knowing somehow it wouldn't matter. The little daycare center paid my bills, allowed me flexible hours to be there for Lucas, and gave me purpose. But in their world, it might as well have been nothing. "You know," my mother would inevitably add, "Vanessa's friend is hiring at her company. Something in administration. Much better benefits than you have now." I'd nod again, smiling tightly, while underneath the table my fingers would twist a napkin into shreds. The wedding venue smelled of white roses and expensive perfume. Crystal glasses clinked, string quartet music floated above polite conversation, and everywhere I looked, people seemed to belong in a way I didn't. Women in designer dresses exchanged air kisses. Men in tailored suits clapped each other's shoulders. Even the waitstaff moved with a confidence I couldn't muster. I'd been seated at the family table, of course, but at the far end, beside my second cousin from Milwaukee who kept mixing up Lucas's name. "How's school going, Louis?" he'd ask, then drain his champagne before Lucas could correct him. Ethan had hugged me briefly during the reception line, distracted and glowing with happiness. "You made it," he'd said, as if there had been some doubt. Maybe there had been. "Wouldn't miss it," I'd replied, meaning it despite everything, because beneath the hurt lay the memory of the boy who had clung to my hand in the dark. When the toast began, I'd prepared myself for the usual platitudes. My mother's speech started normally enough. Childhood anecdotes about Ethan, most of which erased my presence entirely. Praise for his accomplishments, welcome to the bride. Then she'd turned, glass raised toward me. "And to Rachel, Ethan's big sister." A pause, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Who's always marched to the beat of her own drum." The room chuckled indulgently. "Even when that drum was leading her in circles." More laughter. I stared at the centerpiece, counting the roses. 12 white, 3 pale pink. She's like a clearance item with no tag left. The room roared. I felt myself shrink, folding inward like the napkin origami beside my plate. Lucas's question, "Why are they laughing at you, Mom?" pierced through my fog of humiliation. Then, Vanessa took the microphone, her white dress catching the light, diamond earrings flashing with each practiced movement of her head. "And Rachel," she'd said, her voice honeyed with false affection. "You know how we always joke that some people just never quite figure life out? Well, we're all just so glad you could make it tonight. It must be so hard to find a sitter on a Saturday." As the laughter swelled again, I watched Lucas's face change. The confusion in his eyes hardened into something else. Before I could stop him, he was out of his chair, straightening his little bow tie as he walked toward the microphone stand. "Lucas!" I called after him, but my voice was lost in the noise of the reception. I watched in horror as my son, all 4 feet and 60 pounds of him, marched directly toward the stage where my mother, the bride, and my brother stood. The room fell gradually silent as people noticed the small boy approaching the stage with determination. Lucas climbed the 3 steps without hesitation, his dress shoes making soft taps against the polished wood. Vanessa's perfect smile faltered. My mother's eyes widened. Ethan looked confused but not alarmed. He'd always had a soft spot for his nephew. The DJ moved to intercept Lucas, but Ethan raised a hand. "Let him speak." My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. What was he doing? Lucas had always been observant, thoughtful, sometimes too much so for a 9-year-old, but he'd never been one for public speaking. At school performances, he preferred backstage roles. At birthday parties, he'd whisper "thank you" so quietly, guests would lean forward to hear. Yet here he was, reaching for the microphone that the DJ reluctantly lowered to his height. Lucas tapped it twice, the sound echoing through the now silent ballroom. He cleared his throat. "Hi," he began, his voice small but clear. "I'm Lucas. Aunt Vanessa called me Louis earlier, but it's Lucas." A few awkward chuckles rippled through the crowd. I half rose from my seat, uncertain whether to rush the stage or sink through the floor. Both options seemed equally impossible. "I heard something about the bride," Lucas continued, and my blood turned to ice. What had he heard? What was he about to say? This was Ethan's wedding day. Despite everything, I didn't want to ruin it. "Lucas!" I called out, finding my voice at last. But he either didn't hear me or chose to continue. "Last week, when Mom was dropping me off at Grandma's house so she could work extra shifts to buy our outfits for today, I heard Aunt Vanessa on the phone in the kitchen." The room went perfectly still. Even the waiters paused, trays balanced in midair. She didn't know I was there because I was quiet, looking for my game that I left there before. And she said, Lucas paused, his small brow furrowing as if ensuring he remembered correctly. She said, "Once I marry Ethan, I'll make sure people like his sister never show up again." Vanessa's face drained of color. She stepped forward, reaching for the microphone. "That's not—" But Lucas held firm, stepping back slightly. "You said Uncle Ethan's too soft to say no, and that my mom's embarrassing." Tears filled my eyes, hot and unstoppable now. Not because of what Vanessa had said. I'd suspected as much for years, but because my son had heard it, had carried it, had felt he needed to protect me. "He's 9!" Vanessa hissed, loud enough for the first few tables to hear. "He misheard. Kids make things up all the time." "I didn't make it up," Lucas said simply, still holding the microphone. "You also said Mom's dress would probably be from the charity bin and that—" "That's enough!" My mother cut in sharply, moving toward Lucas. But then something unexpected happened. A woman at table 6 stood up. Melissa, Ethan's friend since college, who I'd always liked but rarely saw anymore. "I heard her say it too," Melissa announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Last month at the engagement party, almost word for word what the boy is saying." Vanessa's face contorted. "This is ridiculous. It's my wedding day." More murmurs rippled through the crowd now, no longer awkward but speculative, critical. I could feel the shift in the air, like a change in weather. The barometric pressure of social judgment suddenly swinging away from me. Ethan stood frozen for a moment. Then he stepped forward, his face unreadable. He placed a gentle hand on Lucas's shoulder before turning to Vanessa. "Did you say that?" he asked quietly, but in the silence, everyone heard. Vanessa laughed, the sound brittle and forced. "Babe, come on, it was girl talk. You know how it is." She reached for his hand. "Don't believe a child over your wife." "Wife of about 2 hours," someone muttered from the back. Ethan didn't take her offered hand. Instead, he looked directly at her, then at our mother, then back at Vanessa. "I've watched how you treat Rachel," he said slowly. "I told myself you were just different people, that you'd warm up to each other eventually." Vanessa's smile became desperate. "Ethan, please, this is our wedding. We can discuss family dynamics later." "I believed you," Ethan continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "For years. But I believe my nephew now." The room held its collective breath. I couldn't move, couldn't think. This couldn't be happening. Not at their wedding. Not because of me. Not because of Lucas. "I should have seen it sooner," Ethan said, his voice growing stronger. "Rachel practically raised me after Dad left. She skipped parties to help me with homework. She worked at 16 to buy me soccer cleats when Mom said we couldn't afford them." My mother made a small, indignant sound. "And you?" He turned to her. "You've been treating Rachel like she's something to be ashamed of since she got pregnant. Single mom, modest job. Heaven forbid someone think the Moores aren't perfect." "Ethan!" my mother gasped. "I'm sorry," he said, not to her, but to the stunned guests. "I can't do this. Not with someone who would deliberately exclude my sister. Not with someone who thinks kindness is optional." Vanessa's perfect composure finally cracked. "You're choosing her? Over me? On our wedding day?" Her voice rose shrilly. "Because of what some kid says?" "I'm choosing what's right," Ethan replied quietly. Then he handed the microphone to the DJ and walked off the stage. For a moment, no one moved. Vanessa stood abandoned beside the multi-tiered wedding cake, her expression cycling rapidly between shock, rage, and disbelief. My mother sank into a chair, hand pressed against her throat as if physically holding back words. Then Vanessa's father appeared at her elbow, guiding her quickly toward a side exit. Her mother followed, shooting venomous glances at anyone who dared meet her eye. In their wake came a silence so profound I could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. Then, slowly, uncertainly, someone began to clap. Others joined in, not mocking or celebratory, but rather in acknowledgement, in respect. They were clapping for Lucas. He stood on the stage, small and suddenly uncertain now that his mission was accomplished. I found the strength to rise from my chair and move toward him on unsteady legs. As I reached the stage, he looked at me with worried eyes. "Did I do something wrong, Mom?" I gathered him in my arms, lifting him off the stage. "No, baby," I whispered fiercely into his hair. "You did something brave." The next hour passed in a blur. Guests awkwardly gathered their belongings, unsure of protocol when a wedding implodes. The wedding planner, a thin woman with stress etched into every line of her face, moved efficiently between vendors, speaking in urgent whispers. I found Ethan sitting alone in a small anteroom off the main hall, his bow tie undone, staring at nothing in particular. "Hey," I said softly, hovering in the doorway. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Hey." "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I never wanted—" "Don't!" He cut me off, shaking his head. "Don't apologize. Not for this." I stepped into the room, letting the door close behind me. "But your wedding—" "Better to know now than later," he said, with a grimace that might have been trying to be a smile. "Where's Lucas?" "With Melissa. She's showing him how the sound system works." Ethan nodded. "Smart kid." "Too smart sometimes," I admitted, sinking into the chair beside him. "Ethan, are you sure about this? Maybe once everyone calms down—" "I've been blind," he interrupted. "Or maybe just willfully ignorant. The way they treated you, I let it happen because it was easier than confronting it." He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, rumpling it back to how he'd worn it in high school. "I'm the one who should be sorry, Rach." I reached for his hand, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the gold band on his finger. "We're okay." "No, we're not," he said firmly. "But we're going to be." The door opened, and my mother stood framed in the entrance, her expression unreadable. "The Clarks want to know what to do about the gifts," she said stiffly. Ethan didn't look at her. "They can take them, all of them." She lingered, fingers tapping against the doorframe. "Ethan, you're being dramatic. This can all be fixed if you just, Mom," I cut in, surprising even myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Not now." She looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Something flickered across her face, not quite remorse, but recognition. Without another word, she turned and left. "You know what's funny?" Ethan said after a moment. "I always thought you were the strong one. Even now, single mom, working 2 jobs sometimes, raising an amazing kid. I was the one who needed the perfect partner, the perfect wedding, the perfect life." "Nobody's perfect," I said quietly. "Lucas comes pretty close," Ethan smiled, a real smile this time. "That kid has more courage than most adults I know." A knock at the door preceded Lucas himself, poking his head in cautiously. "Mom, Miss Melissa says they're packing up the cake and wants to know if we want some." "Absolutely we want cake," Ethan declared, standing up and straightening his rumpled jacket. "It's really good cake. I picked it out myself." Lucas entered, eyeing his uncle warily. "Are you mad at me?" Ethan crouched down to Lucas's eye level. "Not even a little bit. You told the truth when grown-ups wouldn't. That makes you the bravest person at this whole wedding." "Even though there's no more wedding?" Lucas asked, his brow furrowed. "Especially because there's no more wedding," Ethan replied, tousling Lucas's hair. "Want to help me loosen this fancy collar? I feel like I'm being strangled." And as they walked ahead of me back into the main hall, heads bent together conspiratorially, I felt something shift inside me, a weight lifting that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for so long. The weeks that followed were quiet. Ethan moved into our spare room temporarily. "Just until I figure things out," he said, though we both knew it might be a while. My mother sent a text 3 days after the wedding. "Hope you're doing well." I didn't respond. Lucas approached the situation with his usual thoughtfulness. He cleared space on his bookshelf for Ethan's architecture books. He didn't ask questions when Ethan spent whole evenings staring at his laptop, canceling honeymoon reservations and untangling joint accounts. One night, I found them at the kitchen table surrounded by Lego bricks, building what appeared to be a complex suspension bridge. "The key," Ethan was explaining seriously, "is making sure both sides have equal support. Otherwise, the whole thing collapses." Lucas nodded, carefully placing tiny plastic pieces according to Ethan's instructions. He spotted me in the doorway. "Mom, Uncle Ethan's teaching me engineering principles," Ethan supplied. "And your mom already knows all about those. She's been holding things together for years." I started to deflect the compliment automatically, then stopped myself. "Dinner in 20 minutes, engineers. Go wash up." At work, I found myself standing taller, speaking more confidently during staff meetings. When the director announced her retirement, I surprised myself by applying for the position. "You've been our backbone for years, Rachel," she told me during the interview. "It's time you were recognized for it." I got the job. The salary increase wasn't enormous, but it meant I could finally start a modest college fund for Lucas. It meant new winter coats bought at the beginning of the season, not on clearance in January. It meant a small breathing space between paychecks. Ethan insisted on taking us out to celebrate. We went to a local pizza place. Nothing fancy, but Lucas's favorite. As Lucas calculated the tip with careful precision on a napkin, math being his current obsession, Ethan leaned toward me. "I saw Mom yesterday," he said quietly. "She asked about you." I kept my expression neutral, focusing on folding my paper napkin into smaller and smaller squares. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you're doing great. That you got a promotion. That you don't need her approval anymore." I looked up sharply. "I never—" "We all did, Rach," he said gently. "Dad left, and we all scrambled to be what Mom wanted, thinking that would keep her from leaving too. You were just better at seeing through it than I was." Lucas rejoined the conversation, proudly announcing that a 20% tip came to exactly $9.56. We both praised his calculation, and the moment passed. But later that night, after Lucas was asleep and Ethan had gone out with friends, I sat alone in our small living room and allowed myself to really consider his words. Had I been seeking approval all these years? Had I measured myself by my mother's impossible standards and repeatedly found myself wanting? The realization didn't bring the pain I might have expected. Instead, it felt clarifying, like finally getting the prescription right in a pair of glasses. The world hadn't changed. I was just seeing it more clearly now. 3 months after the wedding, life had found a new rhythm. Ethan had moved into his own apartment nearby, but came over for dinner twice a week. Lucas had started 4th grade and joined a science club. I was settling into my role as director, implementing changes I'd wanted to see for years. On a crisp Saturday morning, as Lucas and I folded laundry together, his contribution being mostly mismatched socks, my phone pinged with a text message. My mother's name appeared on the screen. "I'd like to come by this afternoon, if that's all right." Lucas noticed my hesitation. "Who is it, Mom?" "Grandma?" I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "She wants to visit." Lucas considered this as seriously as he considered everything. "Are you going to say yes?" I looked at my son, this remarkable, perceptive child who'd seen through pretense with the clarity only children possess. "What do you think I should say?" He folded a small T-shirt with careful precision. "Ms. Garcia at school says sometimes people can change, but only if they really want to." "Very wise, Miss Garcia," I murmured. "But," Lucas continued, "you don't have to let people hurt you while you wait to see if they'll change." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. When had my 9-year-old become so wise? I picked up my phone and typed, "Today doesn't work for us. Maybe another time." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't a door slammed shut either. It was a boundary, clear and defined. That evening, Ethan and Melissa came over for dinner. Their friendship had evolved into something more in recent weeks, tentative and sweet, in a way that made me genuinely happy for them both. We ate spaghetti at our small table, laughing as Lucas solemnly explained the difference between various dinosaurs, complete with hand gestures. After Lucas had gone to bed, the three of us sat in the living room, comfortable in the soft lamplight. "I used to think I was a scratched label," I said suddenly, surprising myself. "Like what Mom said at the wedding, a clearance item with no tag left." Melissa reached over and squeezed my hand. "Turns out," I continued, "I was the real one. The rest were just stickers that peeled off too easily." Ethan raised his glass in a toast. "To the real ones." Later, checking on Lucas before turning in myself, I found him awake, reading by flashlight under his covers. A harmless rule he broke so consistently I'd given up enforcing it. "Time for sleep, bookworm," I said, gently taking the flashlight. "Mom?" he asked as I tucked the covers around him. "Are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you ask that?" He shrugged, a small movement beneath his dinosaur comforter. "You smile more." "Real smiles, not the kind you used to do." I sat on the edge of his bed, considering. "I am happier," I said slowly. "And a lot of that is because of you." "Because I said something at the wedding?" "Partly that," I agreed, "but mostly because you remind me every day of what really matters." He nodded seriously, accepting this as his due. "What's that?" "Being honest, being kind, and being brave enough to be both, even when it's hard." He yawned, eyelids growing heavy. "That's easy." I leaned down to kiss his forehead. "No, it's not. That's what makes you extraordinary." As I turned out his light, he murmured sleepily, "We're both extra. Extraordinary," I supplied softly. "Yeah, that," he mumbled, already drifting toward sleep. Standing in the darkened doorway of my son's room, I felt it with complete certainty, not the absence of pain or the guarantee of smooth sailing ahead, but something more valuable. The knowledge that whatever came next, we would face it together, with clarity and courage. And that, I realized, was something no one could ever discount or devalue. If this story resonates with something in you, don't forget to stand up. Even when your voice shakes, especially then.